Hello! Today I'm going to do a Mars mission in Kerbal space program. I would like to clarify that in KSP, Mars is actually called Duna, so for the rest of this video I'll be referring to Mars as Duna. And I'd like to also state that this was a long mission. It took me around 2 hours to film, so I condensed it to around half an hour to make it more enjoyable to watch. And I'd like to show, with this video, key parts of the mission that are universal with all Duna missions. Hope you'll like it. So, let's begin. So now we're ramping up the thrust on the second stage, which are using the skipper engines, which are not that powerful compared to some of the other engines I've used, but they get the job done with enough of them. So now we can see that these engines are increasing the periapsis to around enough, like now we're in the positives, so now we're at 71 kilometers, now we're in a Kerbin orbit, and now I'm decoupling the second stage from the interplanetary stage, which has been revealed via a fairing. So now I'm just doing is deorbiting the second stage so that we don't clutter the space around Kerbin, which is good advice. And now we're going to be planning my escape to Duna, which is a bit more different than going to the moon, but similar principle. So first we do is set Duna as a target, similarly if you were docking to a space station or rendezvousing to something. And then you can do is make a maneuver node with roughly 1100 units of delta V, and then drag it around your orbit until you can see that you approach Duna close enough that's like an encounter. Similarly, if you were like encountering the moon or Minmus or something like that. So now it's a majestic view of the interplanetary stage, which will be propelling us to Duna and back. So due to these nuclear engines, which I'm using on the interplanetary stage, they don't have an immediate amount of thrust. They would rather do things over a long course of time. So I have to start the engine burn a bit earlier than the maneuver node, just so I don't spend 3 minutes after, instead I can have a 50-50 balance, so I don't make it, because if I do the burn ever so slightly, like if it's at 3 minutes one way and not balanced in every other direction, it won't be, let's say, balanced. So now we can see we've got trajectory to leave the Kerbin system, and now we're just expanding the orbit we'll turn into until we can intersect Duna's orbit. So I forgot to mention last time, but we need to be in a correct transfer window to efficiently reach Duna, which means the angle between Kerbin, the Sun, and Duna should be roughly 45 degrees, so then it's the most effective for going to Duna. So now we can see my trajectory will intersect Duna, and now we're going to do is start doing the massive time warp to Duna. So but before that I need to deploy the solar panels, as this is an unmanned vehicle, so that means I want to make sure that I at least have some electricity. And although the fuselages, which are the liquid fuel tanks below, have some solar panels, it would be much better if they had a bit more solar coverage. So now we are saying goodbye to Kerbin for one of the first times, actually, because I've never really attempted. I mean, I have attempted to go to Duna, but never with a ship that was designed for crew. So now we can see Kerbin and the Mun is having a nice time over there, and now we are in the interplanetary medium, which means essentially Kerbin's gravity is the least important now, and the Sun's gravity is more important. But essentially meaning that our orbit is described as around the Sun, not Kerbin. So now, even though we are 100,000 x, this is a long time this takes, because I mean, in the real world it takes like 6 months to get to Duna, Mars, sorry, and in Kerbin it takes roughly a year of Kerbal time. So now you can see that I am getting very close to Duna, and those green lines of cures are the ComNet path. So one of my previous missions to Duna was to install a relay probe around Duna. That means that the communications aren't going directly to the Kerbal Space Center, but rather they're going to the relay probe. And with the relay probe's more bigger antennas, they can get directed to another relay probe and then can go back to the Kerbal Space Center. That means with even weaker antennas, we can still get strong communications. Earlier, the red planet is finally in view, and now I'm just planning a maneuver node to circularize my encounter into a orbit around Duna. So as you can see, it is a similar concept with going to the moon on Minmus. It's just instead of going onto a moon, you're going on a different planet. So essentially, you have to go through the interplanetary medium by like going through having an orbit going directly controlled by the sun, not by like using your home planet as a guide. Maneuvering the rocket to point at the maneuver node SAS direction. Now I'm going to do is we're going to have a nice view here of the interplanetary stage itself. So now we're just doing a bit of a quick time warp to go to the maneuver node and turn our encounter as to an orbit. If you can see now, you can see the encounters curving a lot more now, and soon we'll be in a Duna orbit. So now what it's going to do is get ready to make sure our periapsis is now going to be within my safe circle as defined by my relay probe. And now we are in a good Duna orbit. Now I'm going to delete that maneuver node and go to the periapsis and reduce the apoapsis to make sure that the orbit's like kind of circular or close to circular as I can achieve. Now we are at the close to periapsis. We are going to do is burn retrograde to reduce the orbit to a more circular one that is within the relay probes area. As you might be able to see, is a small ring on the map view. So now we're just wrapping down the engines to make sure we don't overshoot ever so slightly. So now we are in a Duna orbit and we can start to prepare for landing. So now what I'm going to do is a quick time warp till we have sun, so we can make sure, because I don't want to make it interplanetary stage with out of electricity whilst I'm not operating it. So as you can see, that's the interplanetary stage, and the lander, which is on top, is now going to be decoupling from the interplanetary stage, which will act as a mothership of sorts, and will also act as a small relay to make sure the antennas on inside the probe core can actually do it, because when we are entering Duna, it has an atmosphere, so the antennas will definitely rip off. So using the integrated antennas in the Hex 2 probe core is ideal. So now I was changing the staging so that the engines and the parachutes are all in the right alignment. So now I'm burning retrograde with the lander, and we're going to reduce our orbit around 700 kilometers roughly till, and when you can see now, it will intersect and land on Duna. So now we're going to do a quick time warp until around 70 kilometers away from Duna, so we can start getting ready to turn the lander around to face retrograde, as the atmosphere will start in roughly 10 kilometers, because Duna's atmosphere starts at 50 kilometers. So I want to make sure that before we enter the atmosphere, we're facing in the right direction. As you can see from the heat streaks, we are entering Duna's atmosphere, and normally, if you're like on Kerbal or whatever, it will be very dangerous to land like with bare engines and not heat shield. But in the case of Duna, the atmosphere is less thick as Earth, and also most of it is different gases, so it's fine. Now if we enter the atmosphere, we can start firing those engines to slow ourselves down so that the drogues don't have to do that much work. And speaking of the drogues, I'll deploy them now, as you can see, those tiny red ones. And also noticed last minute that the, let's say, the terrain I'm landing on is quite steep, so the parachutes wouldn't deploy in time, so I had to, let's say, adjust them. And also my main parachutes took too long to deploy. No idea how. And also I deployed those landing legs. Now I've changed the SAS like preset to radial, basically meaning pointing up relative to the planet. And maybe I'll just quickly remind myself to turn on RCS to make sure the lander doesn't fall over, which I've had happen to me several times. So now there we have landed on Duna. As this is an uncrewed mission, we can't do any science experiments, so we have to wait until we can get ready to leave the surface of Duna and try and dock with the mothership. So just seeing, I deploy both of the antennas so we can get some good communication down the surface. And now we're just waiting until I'm going to retract one of the antennas now, and now I can start burning the engines to leave Duna. So as you can see, I'm retracting the landing legs because, as we all know, Duna has an atmosphere, so if I don't retract them, they'll break off. And even though this lander is designed for one use, I still just don't want to just break anything. So now I'm figuring out what direction to point my orbit, which is a bit annoying. But if you set the mothership as the target, you can see the ascending node and descending node. And usually, if they are not ridiculously high, that's probably the best direction. Because like if you do it the other way, for example, it'll be like close to 180 or whatever. So when me being like close to like -2 and +2 for the descending node and ascending node respectively is a good sign that I'm pointing the right way. So I'm just tracking my fuel, because last time I attempted a Duna landing, let's say, the lander did not have enough fuel to circularize into an orbit. So this is why I'm doing a test launch again now, just to make sure that when I actually do a high stakes launch, I don't, let's say, mess it up. So now we can see the apoapsis is 61 kilometers roughly, which is outside of Duna's atmosphere, which starts around 50 kilometers. So now I'm just doing is planning a maneuver node just to absolutely be certain that we'll have enough fuel, so what we can do is get to an orbit where we can kind of intersect with the mothership. Just because we can do is with an orbit like I planned for the maneuver node to do a intersection like that, but it's a bit more rarer because you have to make sure the intersection is close to there. So that's why ideally increasing the entirety of the orbit's the best. So now you can see I've circularized my orbit, so it'll be a kind of a low Duna orbit. And now I can deploy the antennas, as we're not in atmosphere, so we don't have to deal with anything. And I've just trained the probe core to hibernation and warp, just so I don't lose too much electricity when I'm doing a time warp. So now you can see I've increased my orbit size so we can intersect with the mothership. And now I'm going to be burning prograde on the apoapsis to increase the periapsis, so it's kind of like very closely to the orbit of the mothership. So now you can see that my orbit is very close and very similar, and I'm plotting the last of the maneuver nodes to make sure the inclination is the same, because then you have a higher chance of intersecting with the object you're docking or rendezvousing exactly. So now I was doing the small burn just to level off the orbit, exactly. And now I'm going to do a long time warp until the intersection is super close. And then I can start doing the target and retrograde burns. I'm now just ever so slightly adjusting my orbit size, because let's just say when your orbit's either not too big or too small, the rate of an encounter it just takes a longer amount of time. Still can happen, it will take longer, so I just want to speed it up ever so slightly. So now I'm just doing a bit of another quick time warp until the encounter's super close with the mothership. And so now I'm just revealing the docking port hidden under that nice shield, and as you can see the separation of the intersection is super close now. And I'm doing a mixture of target and retrograde burns, which, yeah, if you want to remember, you have to make sure you're in the target speed menu, not surface or orbit, just target, because then everything is, let's say, very screwed, or you'll be very screwed. Now I can see I'm going like within 5 kilometers, as you can see, and now we're just slowly reducing the separation. So always just a mixture of target and retrograde burns. Just do target, retrograde, then go on for a bit of the trajectory, and then go and do those burns again, and then eventually you'll get there. So as you can see, I managed to do is on the purpley in section, and now the orange in section, it's now 0.0, which is super good. And of course, I would like to do is reduce my speed ever so slightly, just so I don't crash into my ship, or do have a chance of crashing into my ship if I miss. So now I'm just reducing the thrust on the engines, because I mean I could do this with RCS, and I sometimes like to do as well, but in like just only until I'm like getting very close, I still use my engines for the thrust, because they have a lot of power that can be dispensed relatively quickly compared to thrusters. So now I'm pointing the mothership and the docking port at the top, as you can see, towards the lander, and I'm pointing the lander towards the mothership, and soon when I get close enough I can set the docking ports to targets themselves, not just the ships, which increases your docking accuracy, let's say. As you can see, now I'm just doing a mixture of setting the docking ports for each ship as targets. Now you can see I'm using the docking mode for the RCS thrusters, meaning I'm able to move the lander around purely by the thrusters. So now I'm getting within a few meters, and soon, as you can see, the sun in between us. And now I managed to dock with the mothership, which is a super cool sight. So now I'm doing is trying to do is get ready to transfer the fuel from the lander back to the mothership, because this lander will be separated back from the mothership and then deorbited. So what I would like to do is take as much fuel as I possibly can from the lander, so now I'll at least have a bit more flexibility with my burns to return the mothership portion back to Kerbal, which is the only part that returns. So now I'm just getting ready to transfer the fuels, which in Cosplayer is ever a bit annoying, but it does get the job done eventually. And as you can see in my like fuselages, because actually these nuclear engines don't need an oxidizer, just liquid fuel, which is interesting design choice for an engine, but can't complain if it's super high delta V really and super efficient. Along with the Terrier engines, which actually, if you don't notice, actually have already used in the lander, because I'm going to use them on my lunar landers and everything, because they're super good in vacuums. I mean, in atmospheres not so much, but as you can see, I managed to take off on Duna, so it's fine. So you can also see the super cool relay antennas on the mothership, which is very cool. Just to like basically do is relay your weak antenna to like another source, and then eventually you can go from the relay station to either another relay or to the KSC, the Kerbal Space Center. So now what I'm getting ready to do is undock the lander from the main ship, or the mothership really, and do is deorbit it. So now I'm just about to undock. So now I'm just using the docking mode again to do is move away from the ship so I don't ram into the solar panels, because I don't want to lose that electricity gain. Although there are some solar panels on the fuselages, I still don't want to risk it. So now I'm just burning to reduce the orbit, and I ran out of fuel. But RCS is very powerful. Not on land, like in atmospheres, but in the vacuum space, it is super effective. So now I'm just adjusting the periapsis further down until it will definitely 100% crash land on Duna. So like I see those RCS thrusters, and you're probably hearing that they are screaming, they are meant to. That's what they do. So you can see my monopropellant is dropping a bit, but it won't be reused again, so yeah, nothing to complain about. So now you can see the periapsis is now negative, so definitely this lander will intersect with Duna and crash land. So now I'm going to switch in the map view over to the main ship and plan my escape, which will essentially is a similar to thing we were doing earlier with when leaving Kerbin, which is to make a maneuver node with roughly 1100 units of Delta V and wait until you get like close. You do intersect, and ideally you would do is wait until the next transfer window with the time for Duna. So essentially the angle from Duna to the sun to Kerbin is 45 degrees. Unlike the other, it always is the same, but like still, make sure ideally you're in the transfer window. But you can make it work when you're not in the transfer window, just will take more fuel. So now you can see I'm approaching the last few tens of units of Delta V. So what I'm just going to do is just go with the maneuver node and start using the prograde SAS mode. And now you can see I'm lowering the periapsis because when I was attempting to do a similar mission earlier, I found out that if I try to do something similar as I was going to Duna with Kerbin, it turns out turning the encounter into an orbit was, let's say, used a lot more fuel than I expected. So essentially I was getting close to abandoning that mission. But for this one, I discovered that I could do a small adjustment of the orbit when I'm on Duna to reduce the Kerbin periapsis as much as I can, and do another maneuver node to reduce the periapsis even further. So essentially, it's not like a flyby; it's like a forced crash land, which for like asteroids and other objects like that is not ideal. But this is a ship with planned re-entry. I mean, it's gonna land anyway, so why not do it? Like, just force it to land. So normally you can actually it's very cool that you can actually sometimes be able to do some burn you can do burns several styles. Like you can do is when I do sometimes attempt to do some asteroid redirection missions, you normally think instinctively to use prograde whatever, but when using the radial and anti-radial, you can actually do a similar effect with this actually a lot less fuel than the prograde burns. So normally you can actually do just when you do maneuver nodes, play around with the other object, like things like prograde, normal, and radial, because they can sometimes be like hidden gems, if you know what I mean. So now you can see I've reduced the periapsis of the Kerbal encounter to below 0. So essentially, we'll just force land crash on Kerbal. So now we're approaching Kerbal, and you can see the Kerbal encounter thing on the map view. So now we're getting very. Now you can see the Minmus and the moon, and of course Kerbal itself, and also one of my relay probes. So now we're gonna do is wait until we're getting within a few hundred kilometers, and we can start just getting ready to prepare for landing, because as you can see I'm going very fast, a lot faster than I'm coming back from like Minmus or the moon, or the Mun, sorry. So let's say it is a bit more of a fiery landing, and actually if you can see this time I'm landing in Antarctica, which is interesting because I almost never do polar orbits because they're quite inefficient for fuel. It's always best to do as a orbit basically essentially to not do it the opposite way of the planet's momentum, because then if you do it with the planet's momentum, you get a kick, if you will. But if you do it the other way, you need to overcome the energy. So now you can see I've separated the command module from the mothership, and you can see it's wiggled itself free. And soon you'll see that stage is fiery demise, but we didn't talk about that. Now I'm just using the docker mode and the inbuilt RCS thrusters on the Mark 1.3 command module, which sort of slightly adjust where it is compared with docker mode. So as you can see, the interplanetary stage is having a bit of a bad fiery demise, but we don't care because there's no one on it. So now you can see I'm hurtling Kerbal at still 4,000 meters a second, which is a lot. And interestingly, I've never had this happen to me before. I actually it just couldn't stabilize at retrograde, which is interesting. And as you can see, the G-forces are quite high. So now I'm deploying the drogue parachute and ever so slightly adjusting the altitude, because the altitude is relative to sea level, not the terrain you're landing on. So sometimes if you do a 4,000 on your drogues and then let's say you land at 6,000 meter area, then your drogues won't deploy, which is not great if you want, because then basically you just crash land. So that's why increasing altitude is a bit of this adds some extra safety. So now we're coasting, now we're below 1,000 meters, and we can do is deploy the main parachute to slow us down to a nice 5 meters a second, which is within the tolerance of the heat shield that's below. I mean, you can actually jettison the heat shield, but as you can see, I have the experimental storage unit, which will be used in the actual Kerbal crewed missions to store scientific experiments and return the data back to Kerbal. So as you can see, we're going down now. We've landed back on Kerbal. So that's it. Goodbye.